Good evening, class. So we're going to finish up our notes on complex patterns of inheritance. And one of the last ones we're going to look at is sex-linked inheritance. So by that name, we know it has something to do with the X chromosome, or the sex chromosome. In this case, the X chromosome. And so what happens is there are many genes that are located on the X chromosome. Because males only have one X chromosome, they are affected far more often than females are. Now that's not to say that females cannot be colorblind or have hemophilia or have Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, but it is much harder for them to have that because they would have to get both copies of an affected X chromosome. So please pause the video and fill in where it says genes that are found on the X chromosome on that open bullet on your paper. Okay, so for sex-linked inheritance, I just wanted to show you how this would look. And so in the case of this male and female here, we have a normal female with XX chromosomes, but the male is affected with hemophilia. So he has this little red band on his X chromosome, which designates that he has this disorder. So of course the egg and sperm, the X chromosomes are going to separate or segregate independently of each other. And in this case, the X chromosome from the male will always be given to his daughters. That's all he can give to his daughters. The son, on the other hand, is going to get the Y chromosome. So dad cannot pass this on to his sons, and they will be normal. The females in this case, because they have a normal X chromosome from their mother, they will be carriers. So they won't have the disease, but what happens is they can possibly pass this on to their offspring. So colorblindness is one of the sex-linked traits that we like to talk about. And as we said, this is passed on from mother to son. And in the case of colorblindness, there's actually several different types. If you look here at the slide, this is one type of colorblindness. And the right-hand side is showing a circle with a series of dots and then two numbers. So if you have normal vision, you should be able to read this number, which is 29. If you can't, then you might have a certain type of color blindness. This particular person who has this type of color blindness sees this, or this would be normal, but we see this sort of fuchsia colored flower bud. So in just a moment, I'm going to stop this slide, and I'm going to show you a website where you can go and sort of look at it. So let's go back here. Notice that this is what normal people see. They're going to see the number 29, numeral 29, and they're going to have a fuchsia bud. Here's another type of color blindness. And notice it's very hard to see the numbers, and the person who's colorblind is actually going to see a blue color rather than that fuchsia. Here's another one. This is associated with the type of cone in your eyes, and it's very monochromatic, so it's sort of a gray blue for that bud. And the last one, they see sort of a red color. And so it just kind of varies on what you have, but some of them are actually sex-linked and others are not. So we're going to move on. Excuse me. And before we move on to the next type, I want to have you pause this, fill in this information under color blindness, and then we'll talk about what you need to do on your paper. Okay, so for color blindness, you notice that I have given you some notation. And it's important to remember that we always use our X's and our Y's. So in the case of normal sight, it's going to be X big B. If you had the recessive allele, which means you would have color blindness, it would be X little b. And so I've already filled in for the normal sighted female, X big B, and the colorblind male, X little b and Y. So let's go to the carrier female. Now remember, she's not colorblind, but she actually is carrying one of the X chromosomes that was passed on to her by her father. So her genotype should be X big B and X little b, because she's a carrier. If it's a colorblind female, then she actually has two little b's, so it's going to be X little b, and she will be colorblind. For a normal-sighted male, he's going to be X big B and Y. So the most important thing to remember when you are solving sex-linked inheritance is to always use your X's and your Y's, because what happens is there's a 50-50 chance that you will produce a daughter or a son, and in order to simulate that, we use the X and Y chromosomes so that our Punnett square is broken down into half females and half males. So please pause your video and solve these two colorblind problems. Okay, moving on. Another sex-linked inheritance is hemophilia, which we talked about with Queen Victoria. Hemophilia is still around, but it can, we have lots of different things now that we can use so someone does not bleed to death, per se. What they are lacking is a factor VIII that is in the blood, and they can get this or extract it from donor blood and give it to these people. So they have a much longer life than they did before. So the notation for hemophilia works the same way. We have our dominant allele for normal blood clotting would be X big H. If they have hemophilia, it's going to be X little h. So please, using that similar notation, please solve for these two problems on hemophilia. Okay, we're going to move on to epistasis. Now, epistasis is an interesting type of inheritance pattern because you have more than one gene. You actually might have two or maybe three, and one of these genes seems to control the others. So we've got a case here of some horses, and they have one gene called the C gene that codes for the presence of a pigment. So if the pigment is there, then they will get different colors, such as brown or tan. But if the pigment is recessive, or the alleles are recessive, then the pigment is not there, and they will be more or less albino. So if you look at the cross here, which is a dihybrid cross, notice the majority of the offspring have the brown coat. And that is because, if you notice, they all have a dominant C gene or C allele present, which means they will now code for brown. There are 3/16 that are coding for tan. So notice they have little b, but they still have the dominant C gene, so they will be tan. The remaining 4 out of 16, because they have the recessive genotype for C, they will show no pigment. One of the examples I think of most often with epistasis has to do with Labradors. And if you know of people who have labs, they usually have chocolate labs, black labs, and yellow labs. And it runs the same way as this. When they have a gene that controls the color, then if it's recessive, they'll be yellow. If it's dominant, they'll either be black or chocolate, depending upon that particular allele. Moving on to nature versus nurture. So please stop your video or pause it and fill in this information on your sheet. So we've been talking about how we have all these genes on our chromosomes. But in addition to our genes, we are also controlled partly by our environment. In this case, that is our nurture. So nature would have to do with our genes and what we actually have inside of us. And then the nurture is whatever we're exposed to and how that can affect us in turn. So a great example of this in plants is hydrangeas, and that we have them all over North Carolina. Notice that they could be pink or purple, and this is based on the acidity of the soil. And so many things can affect us. It could be, in the case of plants, it could be the climate, it can be the soil, it can be the food that the plant is getting. And of course, for us, a lot of it has to do what we ingest, the types of food we eat, and then more or less our behaviors. The last little bit that I want to talk about is gene linkage. This has to do with some genes that are very, very close together on the chromosome. And because they're very close, they tend to always move together, especially when we talk about recombination during prophase 1. So if you look at these little chromosomes down here, the yellow and the green, notice that the A and the B chromosome are very close together. So chances are they will always move together. In the case of Shaun White, notice here, he has freckles and red hair. And most people that you know, if they do have red hair, they usually have freckles. Occasionally they don't. But that has to do with the fact that freckles and red hair go together, much like that the A and the B genes. And that concludes our study of complex patterns of inheritance. Thank you.